In this episode, we are going to be talking about Sass. So what is Sass? Sass is the most mature, stable and powerful professional-grade CSS extension language in the world. So Sass is an extension language. So what that means is that it has some specific syntax. You can even use some syntax that is actually used in programming languages, like if, for each. You have something similar to arrays, variables, and so on. So you can use that syntax and then compile it to regular CSS, which browsers can understand. This is what we actually did in the previous episode, so if you didn't check that episode out, please do so now, because we need a task runner to compile our Sass or SCSS into normal or regular CSS which browsers can understand. So this is very important. Whatever we write here now in our SCSS files, the browsers can't understand that. We have to compile it to our normal form. So in this episode, we are going to go through some basic stuff from Sass. Of course, we are not going to go through everything because, as you will see, if you check out the documentation for Sass, it's pretty extensive. But we will go through some basic things that will get you on your way to become Sass and SCSS master. So you have Sass, but you also have a few more CSS extension languages, and two of the most popular ones are Stylus and Less, and they are pretty much all similar. So most of them have functions, mixins, operators, variables, and so on. So if you don't like Sass for some reason, you can also check out these two languages. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so what I like to do in this series is start the series by doing something we did in the previous episodes, just as a reminder. So we are in our command line and I'm going to create a folder called SCSS. Okay, and I'm going to cd into that folder. Okay, and now that I'm in that folder, I'm going to copy gulp-file.js and package.json files from the directory that we did in the previous episode, which is called the task runner. So the task runner is actually is in the public folder. So I'm going to do cp task runner. And then in this curly braces, I'm going to say gulp-file.js and package.json, and I want to copy it right here. So in SCSS directory. So if I just press enter and do ls, you can see that now I have gulp-file.js and package.json. So we are going to need gulp-file.js to compile our SCSS into normal CSS. But first of all, we have to install all the npm dependencies, which we did in the two episodes before. So to do that, npm install. Okay, now that this is done, we can check out this again. So we have gulp-file.js. Now we have node modules, also npm or node package manager created package log file, and we have our package.json file. Okay, now I'm going to create SCSS directory, and I'm going to create a file called index.html. So this is going to be our entry point file for browser sync, and so that we can check out what is going on when we write our SCSS. Okay, and let's open this in Sublime. Okay, now we are in Sublime, and as you can see, we have node modules, SCSS, which is empty for now, gulp file, and so on. So let's check out our gulp file. So this is the gulp file from the previous episode. Of course, check that episode out. I'm not going to repeat that again. We have watch task, we have browser sync setup, and we have our gulp task for compiling SCSS and also auto prefixer to auto prefix our vendor prefixes that we need for our files. So let's just see what's going on here. So we are looking at the SCSS folder. We are looking for all of the SCSS files, and then we are compiling them down to the dist directory where we will have our normal CSS. So this looks okay to me. I don't think I will change anything right here, and we can just go to our console and run gulp watch. So gulp is now watching, and it's opened up our index.html file. Let's just go to index.html and add something to it. Let's add some text. SCSS is awesome. Save it. Let's see if browser sync works. So nothing happened. Let me just see what's the problem. It says it reloaded the browser, but it actually didn't. Okay, so I had to refresh the page. Let's just try this again. Okay, now it works. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. Okay, now we have all this set up, and now we can go into SCSS. So before we go into SCSS, I just want to explain something. So you may heard me calling this Sass, SCSS, Sass files, SCSS files. This is because you have two versions of Sass. You have, if you go to learn Sass on this sasslang.com, you go to learn Sass, you can see that there are actually two versions in which you can write code. So you can write the SCSS version, which is very similar to normal CSS. So you have these curly braces, you have semicolons and so on, and but you also have Sass version. So you can call your file style.sass, and then you can write files like this. So as you can see, there are no semicolons here. Also, there are no curly braces. We are going to use SCSS syntax, but you can also use Sass syntax if you want, if you find it better in some way. The problem, or maybe the advantage of Sass syntax, is that you have to indent all your CSS commands. So it's indent base. So if this font right here was indented the same as the body, then this wouldn't work. But with the SCSS, you can just write your commands in between curly braces, and the indentation would not matter. Okay, so just want to clear this up. Let's start writing our first SCSS code. Okay, so I'm just going to go to my index.html file and create a link to our style.css file. Okay, so that we have it included on our page. Save this. Now we have to create our first SCSS file. So to do that, I'm just going to create it in SCSS directory. So I'm just going to call it style SCSS, and I'm going to create it in SCSS directory. Okay, so as you can see, we have it right here. So one of the things that is great about Sass, and probably style is endless, is that you can import other files into your main file. This is important because you wanna separate your code into some meaningful blocks or some meaningful files. So let's say we want to have I don't know, file called layout. So I'm just going to import layout into style.scss. So if I do import layout, and that's it. But there is a way you have to name that file. So to name it, we are going to create it, of course. So I'm going to create a new file, call it layout SCSS. But for this to be a partial file, you have to put this line in front of it. So bottom line, I don't know exactly what this is called in English. So you put this bottom line, layout SCSS, save it, and now you have this file right here, and this style.scss file is importing that file here. So one more thing you have to understand when you're writing SCSS, so you would probably have something like style.scss or global or whatever you want to call your main CSS file, and you would and that file would only be used to import stuff in it. You can write CSS code in it, but by some standards that are developed over the years, you would just probably write imports in it and then your other code in layout SCSS. So you may have import header, import footer, import, I don't know, content or something like that. So if we save this, now this probably won't work, and you will see that it doesn't work because our dist folder was not created. So our compilation of SCSS files didn't run, and this is because Gulp currently does not know about these files. So to correct this, we will enter out of Gulp and start it again. Of course, there are some ways in which you can make Gulp see new files, but we are not going to go into this right now. So right now we have SCSS is awesome. Let's just save this one more time so that our files get compiled. And as you can see, now we have dist folder, and in this file we don't have anything, because this import command will not go into CSS. It just means that get me all the code that is in this file. So if I do something to this file, so layout.scss, so body is black, and save it, go to our page, now body is black. But also if we check out style CSS, you can see that we have body right here. So this is the import command. You have import commands in normal CSS also, and it's going to import other CSS files that you have. But the problem with that is that browser is going to have to make 2 network requests for your CSS in that case. But when you're using import in SCSS, then it's just importing that code and putting it directly into a file. So in your dist folder, you don't have 2 files, you don't have layout CSS file, but you have just one file with all the code in it. So that is why I said that when you're starting, you're just going to create just one style.scss file, and you're going to import all of the other files into that file. And this is of course important because you wanna separate your code into some meaningful blocks and files. Okay, so let's create another partial right here, and I'm going to call it variables SCSS. And in that file, we are going to write our variables. So variables are specific to SCSS, Sass, or stylus, or less. So they all can use variables, and variables are just just like in normal programming languages. So you would name a variable like this. So let's say we want to make a variable for color ugly red. Ugly red. So this is our variable, and that variable is going to have a value of ff0000. So this is our variable, ugly red. So what I can do right now, if I can go into our style.scss and import variables. Since this is a new file, I'm going to quit out of this, start Gulp Watch again, and now I'm going to go, okay, so this is started. I'm going to just save this file again so that this runs, and I'm going to go to my variables.scss, and actually not there but into layout SCSS, and I'm going to write background ugly red. Okay, instead of the actual color. So when I save this, you will see that there will be an error. I just want to show you errors because we mentioned them in the previous episode, but you haven't seen them. So this right here, so this on error says log error. So what does this say? So says to us undefined variable ugly red, but we define that variable. So this is one more thing you have to take note, because it's the order of your imports is very important. So layout is before variables. So Sass didn't get this variable ugly red, but first it compiled layout SCSS, and then it said, okay, there is no ugly red variable because we told it that variables comes after layout file. So I'm just going to move this here, save it, and now as you can see we don't get any errors. And if we go right here, we got this ugly red color. Of course, variables are not just used for colors. You can do something like h2 and let's just say lorem 20. I'm using the Emmet plugin right here to create this text. Save this. If we check out this text right now, you can see that it's probably something like Times New Roman or whatever the default is. So we can go to our variables and say font primary. So our primary font is going to be Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. Save this in our variables. We go to our layout CSS. I mean, we could write all of our other code into variables, but the Sass is good for this separation of concerns. So you would have variables a file, and you would only have variables in it. In our layout file, we are going to have code that is our layout. Okay, so we can say h2 font family. Nope. Font family is going to be font, what did we call it? Font primary. Okay, save it. And now as you can see, this is the different font from this one. So this is the way you would use variables in your code. Also, one more thing why this is important is because, so let's say you have 10 colors that you're using on your website. These are the colors that are defined by your client. And now you create the project, and the client says, well, this, I don't know, dark red, I want it to be lighter. So what you would, in the old days, what you would need to do is you should go to your CSS files and change all the references to that color. But with variables, you would just go into variables and change this value to something else, and it would change all over the site if, of course, you used variables in your CSS. So let's move on from variables to mixins. So mixins are one of the most important things that you get with SCSS, or one of the most useful. So with the mixins, you just define the pieces of code that you are reusing over and over again. And I'm going to show you actually an example that is actually going to be useful to you. I'm using this all the time. So let's say we want to create mixins for our media queries. And before we begin that, you would, of course, in a real project, maybe create another file called mixins. Of course, put it at the top of your import order. So you would have variables, mixins, and then you would have your layout file. So you would create a mixin for your media queries. So to do that, I'm just going to define a mixin, and I'm going to call it MD up, or maybe medium up. So this is going to refer to all the code that is going to be displayed on our browser from 768 pixels and up. So I'm just going to define it like this, and then I'm going to say add media. So you define a media query, add media screen, and min width is going to be 668 pixels. Okay, and I'm going to have some content in it. So this is everything you would usually write in your media query. You would have this piece of code, and then you would have something in here. So we defined the mixin for medium up, and let's create another one for large up. And that is going to fire from 1024 pixels and up. 124, and this is our large up mixin. Okay, so we have mixin medium up and large up. So how do you use them? So let's just create a block. Actually, in our HTML, I'm going to create a block, and I'm going to put some text in it. And then we are going to go to our layout file and define that block. So it's going to have a background of white. It's going to have pairing of 20 pixels, and it's going to be width is going to be, let's say, 300 pixels for the smallest screens. So we are doing mobile app version of our media queries. So we are starting with the smallest and then going to bigger resolution and then bigger resolution and so on. So background is white, pairing 20 pixels. Let's put it on the middle of the screen. So margin is going to be 40 pixels auto. So this auto command is going to put this at the center of the screen. Save this and see how it looks. Okay, so this is our block. And now if we turn on this, so as you can see, this block, what is happening to this block actually? Why is it getting smaller? This is weird. Okay, so I know what's going on right here. So you have to put this into your index.html file because the Chrome is actually mimicking the mobile device. And if you don't include this, then it's going to try to make your content as big as the screen is. So this is what's happening right now. But if I save this with this width, device width initial scale equals 1, now this works correctly. So okay, I changed behind the scenes some stuff because I was testing it out, but I'm going to put this to be 300 pixels again. Okay, so it's 300 pixels. And now since we are using this mixins, so of course you could do media screen. You could do this. So media screen, once you are over 768 pixels, then the width should be 600 pixels, for example. Okay, and this would work, right? So if I go like this, once we cross 768 pixels, now our block is 600 pixels. But since you have a mixin, you wouldn't write it like this because, come on, you don't want to write this all the time. You would just do at include. So this is the way you would include a mixin into your code. Include medium up, and then you would just do with 600 pixels, save it, and it works the same way. So now it's 300. Once you cross this threshold, now it's 600. And now if we want to use large up, include large up, width is 1000 pixels. Save this. And now if we go over 1000 pixels, now we get this. So this is a pretty useful mixin for your media queries. Of course, you can do a lot of stuff with mixins. I of course urge you to check out this documentation, maybe check out some examples and so on. But this is the basic of mixins, and I just wanted to provide you with the mixins that are actually going to be useful for you. So I'm using these mixins all of the time. So Sass or SCSS also comes with functions, and functions are very similar to something that you would use in the normal programming languages, in that you would define a function, that function would receive some data, and then it would do something with that data. I am also going to show you an example which may be useful to you. So let's say like this. So we want to create a function that is going to take our pixel-based values and convert them into rems. So you should be using rems pretty regularly in your designs, actually in your web projects. So how do you do that? Well, we are going to create a function, and I'm going to call this function rem. And that function is going to receive some data. So it's going to receive target, and it's going to have a default data or default variable, which is going to be called context, and it's going to take the base font size. Base font size. And now what we want to say to this function, so if, as you can see, you can use if expressions in SCSS, if target, so this is what we are writing into our function, if the target is equal to 0, then do nothing, actually just return 0. Right? So it's going to, if we write rem and put a 0 in it, then it's going to just return 0, because 0 is always 0, and that's it. But if that isn't the case, then we do something else. We return target divided by context and plus 0 rems. So this is just, we don't write rem, but 0 rems. Plus 0, it's always going to be the same as this. So we are dividing the target value with our base font size value, and since rems are kind of dependent on the base font size, you have to define that base font size and I'm going to set it, and most of the people set it to be 16 pixels. Okay, so if I go right here in our block, and now I have this pairing right here. So of course you can use rems for pairing, margins, font sizes, and so on. So I have this pairing, and instead of 20 pixels, I'm just going to say rem 20 pixels and save this. Let's see if everything worked okay. Yes. So if we go to our style.css to see what compiled, so remember this says rem 20 pixels, but it compiled to pairing is 1.25 rems, right? So with this function, you can actually, where is it now? Okay, so with this function, you can turn your pixels into rems. So you get a design from a designer. Of course, he's going to define font sizes, pairings, and so on in pixels. So we just take that value in pixels, and if you want to turn it to rems, you would just write rem 20 pixels. Okay, so there is one more function that I want to show you that I actually also use a lot. So you want to maybe turn your pixels into percentages. So for defining the width of your blocks or your div elements. So to do that, you can just do function, and it will take cp. So it will take a target, and it's going to take the container size. Okay, and now we say return target divided by container times 100%. Okay, so what this does is it's going to take the width of your target, so that is defined in your design, and the width of the container that it's currently in. So you have to define two values for this, and then it's going to say it's going to divide that target with a container and multiply it by 100%, and then you would get percentages. Okay, save this. Let's in our block define sub block. Okay, sub block, but I'm going to write it like this. So sub block with 1b, sub block, add some text to it. Okay, and if we go to our style layout SCSS, one more thing that I forgot to mention about SCSS, but I did mention it in the previous episode, you can indent your code. Just don't overdo it. Standard is maximally 3 indentations. So you would do sub block, okay, and you can write A in it and you can write I in it. So let's say you would have pairing 10 pixels, so this is the indentation, and the I tag in this would have font size of 20 pixels, for example. Okay, so when we save this, so as you can see this is indented, but it will compile to block.subblock A and then block subblock AI. Okay, so this is the I tag. Okay, but this is not what we were talking about. I'm just going to delete all of this and create our subblock, and our subblock is going to be of background of black, and it's going to have color of white, so that our text is going to be white. If I save this, check out what's going on right here. So this is our block. I can add pairing to it. Okay, so now it has some pairing and maybe a margin of 20 pixels, but margin top. Okay, so this is our block. So let's say we want this block to be 50% of this block right here. Of course, we can write, because 50% is pretty easy to calculate, we can write with 50%. And this is it. But also we can use CP function that we created, and remember, we first define our target. So in our design says that this sub block should be, let's say, 300 pixels, and we know that our container is 600 pixels, so this block right here should be 600 pixels, or we can do 150, because we defined 300 pixels right here. So 150 is going to be our target block, and our container block is going to be 300 pixels, right? And if I save this, this is going to compile into, so block subblock with 50%. And now we have a block of 50%, and it's always going to be 50%. So let's try it with something much more difficult for us to calculate. We can go right here and say that we want this block to be, I don't know, 82 pixels, for example. So if I save this, now this is our block, but the compiled file says it's the width of it is 27.333 333. So as you can see, it goes up to 5 decimal points. Okay, so I showed you indentation, but let me just do this. So I'm just going to copy all of this, create another block, and I'm going to call this be red or not. Okay, be red, and we are just going to go to our layout and change the color of our body to be white. So we cannot see this block right here, but we have another block that is called block be red. So how would you define this in SCSS? So the normal way would be to write something like block dot be red, and then you would define a background of, let's say, ugly red, right? Save this, and this is our be red block. Okay, but how do you define this in SCSS? You can of course write it this way if you want. Sometimes it's even better and readable this way, but you can also go into block, and so this, I would call this be red a variant. So this is a variant of the same block that we have right here. So everything is going to be the same, except this one is going to have a red background. So you would just go to block, go somewhere around here, and you would do and dot be red, and do background of ugly red, or whatever color you want. Save this, and now this block is red. If we change it to something else, so let's say oh no, like this. So, oh come on. Okay, so gray color. If I save it, now this block is going to be gray, although it's called be red. Okay, so this is the way that you would add another class that you have on your primary class. Let's call it that way. So when you wanna chain some classes together, you can do it via this AND command. And if we check out what compiled, you can see that it says block.beRed, just like we did the first time. So this is readable to browsers, whereas this of course is not. And if you are maybe using some kind of convention for writing your CSS, something like SMEX, BEM, or so on, they usually define variants like this. So it would be actually called block, and the variant of that block would be red. So with this, with those two dashes and then be red, or even some naming conventions use this. But I'm going to use just these two dashes and be red. So block be red. So you can also just go to layout.scss. As you can see, nothing is happening right now. And since this is called block be red, of course you can do this by just writing block be red, and this would work, right? But since this is called block, and you don't want to put this dot right here, so just write it like this. So and dash dash be red, and it's this and is going to represent block, right? So if I save this right now, it's gray again. And if we check out what compiled right here, so it just compiled block be red that has a background of gray color. Okay, so I just want to show you two more things, because this video is getting pretty long right now, and I can make a whole series about SCSS. As I said at the beginning of the video, I just want to show you the basics, and then you would learn from there. Okay, so let's just create one more block, right? And we are going to call this block actually red block, then this one is going to be called black block, and this one is going to be called gray block. Okay, so we have 3 blocks on our screen right now. So this is black, red, and gray. Okay, now you can go to your layout and just define something like black block, background is 0, 0, 0, right? And this is now our black block, and then we would have gray block, and it's going to be CCC, and so on. So this is the gray block, and we should probably define the red block, but we are not going to do that. So this is what we want. And of course you can write it like this. Sometimes I would say it's even more readable to write it like this, but if you have a lot of values, maybe it's better to use maps and each statement. So map is very similar, I would call it, to variables that, not variables, but arrays that you would have in other languages. So I can write something like colors, and this is going to be my map. So you define it like this. So this is the map of colors or array, and I'm just going to say red, and the red is going to be FF0000. Then I would define my black color, black, and it's going to be just 000. And then I would define my gray color, gray, and it's going to be CCC. Okay, you should put this in quotation marks, right, like this, which I forgot, of course. And then to make something like this, you can use each statement. So you can do something like, I'm just going to delete this because this is going to be compiled into our CSS. And you can do something like each. So just like in any other programming language, you have each statement. And with this each statement, I can go through a loop, and this is going to be my array, which I'm going to go through. So I'm going to say name, and name represents this red, black, and gray. Okay, name, and the value is going to represent these colors. So FF000000, CCC, and so on. So value. So we have name and value in colors. So go through colors, get me the names, and get me the values. You can of course call these variables whatever you want. Just this is going to be the first one, and this is going to be the second one. Okay, now that we have this, we can do something like dot, and then we do hash and this. So when you wanna insert a variable into this kind of block, you have to use this syntax. So the hash, curly braces, and then the name of the variable, which is in our case is going to be name, dash block, because remember we call this gray block, black block, red block. Okay, so this is going to be, for this case, red dash block, and it's going to have a background of value, and value is this, so the value of a color value, and that should be about it. So this is going to go through all of our colors, and it's going to create something, so name dash block, and it's going to edit the background of value that is represented here. And if I save this, check if everything worked okay, we didn't get any errors. If we check out our style.css, now we can see that we have red block is background this, black block is background this, and gray block has background of gray. And if we go to our page, we can see that we get black and gray, but the red isn't working because I didn't write it correctly. Save this, and now this has a background of red, black, and gray. Okay, so we are going to wrap it up here because, as I said, this video is getting pretty long and I could really make a whole series about this because, as I said, if you check out this documentation, you can see that you can do a lot more stuff than I just showed you in this video with SCSS or Sass. As I said, definitely check out the documentation just to get acquainted with the things that are possible with SCSS. I of course couldn't get through all of it in this video. Okay, so if you want to ask me questions, of course you can do that via Facebook, GitHub, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really means a lot. And if you love this video, you can maybe even subscribe to my channel. And if you really love this video, then you can maybe go to Patreon and send some money my way. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.